It's been a good season. It's been an entertaining season. Not so much as a Browns
I
fan,
was gonna
but
say, unless of course you're a fan of both of our hometown teams, I am still living in Cleveland. My favorite team's the Philadelphia Eagles. You are not living in Cleveland at the moment, but you're still a big fan of the team. So
yes.
that's where we're gonna start off today. You know, Andy, this may be the most complicated team in football. Um,
Yeah, they brought on the most complicated contract in history.
I mean, listen, we talked about it. You and I, we both know, my expectations going into the year. We talked about it over the summer. We talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the season. Um, my good buddy, Austin Arnold, who, is actually a Washington Commanders fan. He's from the DC area. I grew up a big Commanders fan. He's here in Cleveland, so he's kind of like me. He's a Browns observer. And he basically told me, he was like, hey, if I'm the Browns, they made their own bed. They're lying in it with the Deshaun Watson contract. And I pushed back and I'm like, yeah, but Andy, there's no freaking way he can be on this team next year. I think you have to pay him to sit at home. He can't come back in that locker room, can he?
Not a chance. I mean, they've handcuffed themselves so badly that as a Browns fan, you know there's going to be nothing productive for at least 2 or 3 more years because there's nothing you can do when you're shelling out that much money to a ghost, right? I mean, they can't have him play. I think Zagura was on the radio the other day saying we might have seen him in brown and orange for the last time, and that's the Browns beat reporter
I
working in
mean,
house.
yeah, and I mean, you would hope that's the case, obviously. My
I mean,
biggest question,
it's
I mean,
black and white
here's
between
the
him and
thing though.
Gannon.
To me, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe you thought of a scenario. I can't think of a team that would say, yeah, we'll take on that contract. We'll pay or whatever. I can't think of one single team that would get the Browns out of this mess outside of them just paying him $45 million to stay at home because you can't cut him.
Well, here the situation is this, right? He has 2 years left.
Yes.
So the only thing I could see happening, which is a very long shot, is you find a team that is not good, that does not have a quarterback, and a team that has a ton of cap space, and you say, we will give you Deshaun 2 years. You get to test him out. You get to work him in your scheme and see if it works. And if it works for that team, great. If it doesn't work for them, I mean, if you have a ton of cap, you might as well use it, right? And but in a situation like that, I think the Browns would have to give up more than just Watson, right? They'd have to give up picks for someone to take that contract and probably some pretty hefty picks.
Now, are you a fan of going into the draft and securing one of these young guys, or do you want to get a bridge guy for next year?
I'm so tired of the Browns using high value picks to draft non-skill players. The last thing I want to see is an O lineman or a D lineman or a linebacker or some player that doesn't make high impact plays that win you games. I do not want to see that guy picked in the first round. I want to see the best wide receiver on the board or the best quarterback on the board coming to Cleveland after the first round of the draft.
Um, I agree with you in principle, but I'll push back a little bit on this standpoint that historically speaking, and I realize, this draft I think is a very high end wide receiver draft. From what I've heard, it's also a very good offensive and defensive line draft. Historically, the best offensive linemen are almost always first round picks.
Not Jed Wills.
That is true. And I understand that. But we've also seen that historically. I mean, you look at guys like, Cooper Kupp, third round pick, Puka Nakua, fifth round pick. Like, I get it. There are great receivers in the first round, and I agree with you. I would 100% go after a wide receiver. But I am not against, depending on where you land in the draft, going for an offensive lineman. I don't think you necessarily need to rush in. But I do think this team has so many holes that to me, pick the best player available on the offense side of the ball because the offensive line is not getting younger.
No, they're not. And our offensive line has historically been very good for the last 5 years, but how much of that was due to Coach Callahan?
Yeah.
And he's no longer in the facility. But I mean, there's so many questions with the O line too, and it's really hard to judge their performance this year because a
I
majority of
mean,
the games are played with Watson. And
yeah, and I mean they haven't looked great with Jameis
no,
in there, but they've looked like a competent offensive line, maybe average,
right.
which is a downgrade of what they've been the past few years. Okay. I've tried to beat around the bush so much about this, but obviously, Brown's topic, we have to talk about it. What are your thoughts on Coach Stefanski?
Coach Stefanski. I think that Coach Stefanski has done what no coach has done in Cleveland in the last 25 years, and that's put together a competent football team that gives you a chance to win every week, has made the playoffs, has had winning seasons. I think he's done a fantastic job comparing him to his predecessors. Do I think he's the guy to lead us to a Super Bowl in the next 5 or 10 years? I don't know. I mean, we've seen that it's so hard to judge because of the Watson situation. The offense looked miserable with Watson. It looked extremely good with Joe Flacco. It's looked decent with Jameis. But Jameis has always been the kind of guy that throws 10 touchdowns and 6 picks in the same game.
God,
So it's
that
really hard to
Broncos game
judge.
was literally Jameis Winston in a
Yeah,
nutshell. I mean, we all knew he was going to throw for 500 yards at the same time. You knew you weren't going to win the game. You knew Jameis was going to throw it to Denver eventually.
right.
And
So
obviously, I mean, so
I think we've had a lot of good time with Stefanski. I think the problem is he hasn't found his quarterback yet. And you can't really judge a guy and his offensive scheme if you don't have your quarterback, right? I mean,
yeah.
how much of the Watson decision was him versus ownership, right? Did he
Well,
have a say?
I place a lot of it actually not even on ownership. I think a lot of it is on the heels of Andrew Berry. Um, I think the whole Watson move, and I think that Stefanski being forced to play Watson this year, because I truly believe he was forced to do so. And I think he would have gone to Jameis in a heartbeat if he was allowed to, because I don't think Watson and Stefanski's relationship never meshed. It's the same way I don't think Stefanski and Baker Mayfield's relationship never
Right.
meshed. But I do blame a lot of that on Andrew Berry. And I have seen there's been a lot of weeks which usually things are getting leaked for a reason. I think that it is something that now more than one reporter slash reports in the last month have basically, without saying it, have said Kevin Stefanski would not mind being home for the holidays.
And if that happens, how do you feel about Mike Vrabel turning into that guy?
See, this is my thing, and I said it, what his last year in Tennessee. I never thought Vrabel was the best head coach in the world. I mean, maybe it's because their roster was bad the last couple of years, and I get it. Vrabel would probably be a good motivator, but if you're gonna bring in Vrabel, you need a great offensive coordinator. You need
Yes.
a great defensive coordinator. I like Schwartz, and him and Vrabel worked together before, but Vrabel may want to bring in his own guy. But I don't think it would be this big upgrade that everybody's talking about. It would be.
Uh, yeah, I mean the thing that has irked me about Cleveland Browns head coaching over the last 5 to 10 years is how there has not been a lot of transparency when it comes to our head coach. There's not been a lot of transparent, and what I mean by that is the way that they think. There's a lot of times where we've seen play calls that we just don't understand. And
Yeah.
one major red flag to me about this current regime is how this regime handles injuries. There is so much
It's
left in
very
the dark.
strange.
It's very weird, and
It's
it's
and even from Stefanski, like I was saying, even dating back to last year, this was before the Watson shoulder injury
it was
happened.
during the Baker era even.
Well, even during that, but I thought the strangest one was I don't know if you remember, it was the Baltimore game at
Yeah.
home.
Yes.
And, Watson, there was reports that he was injured, but then Stefanski was like, oh, he should be good to go. There's nothing really wrong with him. And then all of a sudden on Sunday morning, we wake up and it was like, oh yeah, Watson was never going to play. It's like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, and there's I think Kevin is a very likable guy. I think he's a very good guy. I think he's overall a great person to have in an organization from a
Yeah.
likability and football knowledge standpoint. But there's some just weird little things that he does that just I don't understand. There was like maybe it was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we had the ball. It was like second and a yard, and he threw it 3 times, and I think finally got it on fourth down. But it was like, man, why every year does it seem like Browns fans are screaming at their TV, run the damn ball every
I mean,
game?
even Dorsey now. I mean, I was texting people Monday night when I watch the Browns offense now with Dorsey. It's like he's playing Madden and choosing Ass Madden to call his plays.
Yeah.
There's no set scheme. They refuse to run the ball. Jameis is throwing it for 500 yards, partially because they're like, a 1 yard run to Chubb on first down. Running didn't work. Let's abandon the run.
Yeah, and then let's let Jameis unwind the cannon and let it go 80 yards to Jerry Judy, which it's been fun to watch, don't get me wrong. And as a Browns fan, you know nothing's happening this year, right? We're not making the playoffs. That
No.
was obvious from week 3. But
It was obvious from week one, first quarter, when you watched him against Dallas. I mean, I was like, that's not good.
yeah, I mean, your brother said it best to us the other day. He said Jameis Winston is the perfect bridge quarterback. He's the kind of guy who keeps football entertaining. He's the kind of guy who makes NFL fans fall in love with your team. He's the kind of guy who keeps the locker room fired up and engaged week in and week out. So I mean, going back to what you said before, do we want to go into the draft looking for a guy, or do we want to try and find another bridge? I'm happy with what I've seen from him so far. You know what you're getting with Jameis. We didn't know what we were getting with Flacco, and that turned out to be a diamond in the rough. But but moving forward, it's like, where does this team go from here?
Yeah.
You have a lot of aging guys. You've wasted a lot of primes of a lot of really good football players. You wasted Nick Chubb. You wasted Myles Garrett. Wasted Denzel Ward. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah might never ever take a snap again. We don't know. But 2 years ago, we were having this conversation with a lot of excitement, right? The Browns were growing. The Browns were building. There was a window that was starting to open, and now it feels like that window is quickly being slammed shut.
Um, how shocked are you? I'm moving on to the Browns at this point. How
Sure.
shocked are you at what Mike Tomlin and Russell Wilson have done in Pittsburgh?
I mean, it's exhilarating. I'm one of the bigger Steeler haters, obviously, as a Browns fan, but there's no denying that Mike Tomlin is on the craziest run of a head coach in football history. I mean, for the last 20 years, he has been, everybody knows, over 500, but this year in particular, you go from Kenny Pickett last year, right? We all knew Kenny Pickett wasn't the answer, and he still had that team winning football games. And then this year, you run with Justin Fields, a guy who never found success in Chicago. You put up a couple of wins. You move to Russell Wilson once he's healthy, and they've just taken off from there. I mean, it's remarkable.
See, it's outside of that game against Cincinnati, which Cincinnati, oh my God, I can't figure out for the life of me. I feel like they should have 8 or 9 wins and they have four.
Right.
Um, but really, I mean, Pittsburgh scored 44 points on the Bengals, and they've won 2 games this year, Andy, where they've only kicked field goals.
I know. It's amazing.
I
It's
just,
it's like, dude, they're like the anti-Browns, right? Every week, it's like the Browns are going to find a way to lose. Talking over the last 5 years, and every week somehow the Steelers just find a way to get it done.
yeah, but it's funny though that you talked about Russ because I brought on, my one good buddy is a huge Pittsburgh Steelers fan, very astute football fan. He's a very tell like it is guy. He was not happy with Tomlin, the defense, Pickett, the direction, any of it the last few years. He kind of pushed back on me a little bit because I said this was recorded, I think, prior to the Baltimore game, the first Baltimore game. I watched Russ and I'm watching Justin Fields and I'm going, you know what? Outside of the deep ball, I did not see a lot of fundamental changes to the offense, but maybe that is just what's getting them over the hump. But it doesn't look any different to me, besides the fact they're just throwing the football down the field and he's completing all of them.
Yeah. I mean it's amazing. They're in such a good spot right now, right? They're a fairly young team. They I mean aside from Russell Wilson who's probably in his low 30s, I'm not exactly sure. The rest of
Yeah.
their team is fairly young. Najee Harris, George Pickens, Joey Porter Jr. You have a lot of young guys and that team is going to be really good for a really long time.
They just, to me, like, I think the one thing that holds them, like, I don't think of George Pickens, and maybe again, maybe it's our Steeler bias. I don't think of him as this alpha dog, top number one receiver.
No.
I like Fryermuth. He's a very nice tight end. I think their offensive line is good, not great. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren's a good running back combo. It's not. So that's, I think they're just a very solid, good team that finds a way to win games, but I never think of them as like they're an AFC championship contender.
No, they're a very, very good AFC North style football team. They grind out wins. It's not flashy. They just go out there, get the job done, and go home.
So, okay, we've talked about good coaches, Mike Tomlin. We've talked about bad, indifferent, I guess you would say, some good, some bad, Kevin Stefanski. Um, Listen, going into the year, and you know this because I know we talked about this a little bit. One of the teams I was so high on going into the year was the Chicago Bears.
Hmm.
Um, they're 4-8. To me, they're like Cincinnati. They're like 4 plays away from being 8-4. You know,
Yeah, that Thanksgiving game was a fireable offense by
like
Eberflus.
on the spot. And what made it worse was he defended the strategy after.
I
And
didn't
what
see that.
yeah, he basically was like, well, when it gets to 15 seconds, we got to do this. And when it gets to 10 seconds, we got to do this. And then when it gets to seven, this gets eliminated. And it's like, no one told you to call timeout. Like, I get it. There's a lot going on. He should have called timeout. But what I don't understand that nobody's picked up on, why didn't Caleb call a timeout? Why didn't someone alert him on the staff to call timeout? Like, did nobody realize they had a timeout?
I don't know. I don't know how you let that happen. It's just that was very weird. It almost felt intentional. It was weird.
So I think that, like I think the Bears, they got plenty of talent. We all know we went through it. Obviously, they had to fire Shane Waldron. The offense was a mess. Um, from what I've heard out of this new interim head coach Thomas Brown, and we're recording this prior to what will be his first game as the interim coach against San Francisco, some people have said this guy sounds like he's a younger version of Mike Tomlin's on the offensive side. I don't know. Like, I don't know what the Bears need. I don't know if they need an offensive coach or not. I don't know if they need a leader man. They need someone to steer the ship is what they need. I don't know who it's gonna be.
I also think that I think people were way I think Caleb Williams forced people to be way too high on the Bears in his rookie season. And I think NFL reporters, NFL players, and NFL fans as a whole have turned into this entity that demands excellence from day one of joining the NFL.
Well,
But
can I say?
we have to remember, he's a
Well,
rookie. He's a rookie quarterback. You
I,
can't. I mean, it takes time.
I guess my thing is, I feel like the NFL and college schemes are more similar than ever, and guys are walking into this league and they are having success. Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, even Drake May has looked like he can play. I mean,
But okay,
Caleb,
but Jaden Daniels hasn't beat a team over 500 yet, has he? Or
uh, I don't, I
they've beat
don't
up on
think they
bums.
have. Well,
Great.
no,
Jaden
technically,
Daniels, congrats. You
well,
beat the Browns.
technically, no, technically, Arizona they did beat. I think Arizona's right at 500.
Okay. But I mean, it takes time, right? Like we went through this whole saga with Baker. 3 years of average to good QB play. He bounces around, finds a system that works for him, and look at him in Tampa now. I mean, they're not having the best season, but they've also been hit by the injury bug pretty hard. But I mean,
Yeah,
Baker last year was fantastic. Starting this season was fantastic. It takes time.
well, he also has a great situation down there, a great defense, two great receivers. I think
Right,
got three great running backs and
right.
a pretty good offensive line. And Baker lucked out because once Dave Canales went to Carolina, and now, by the way, has got Bryce Young playing the best football of his
I was
career,
about to
arguably.
say,
Um, they did find another great OC though in Liam Cohen, which I do feel like is rare.
right. Yeah. I I
Um,
I don't know. I think people need to pump the brakes a little bit on the Bears. I don't think they're a bad football team. Like you said, they're a couple plays away from flipping their record.
yeah.
And the difference between a good and a great football team, like the Steelers, is in those close games, you find a way to get it done. And they just don't have that yet.
So listen, going into the year, I thought Buffalo would take a winner to step back with all the
So
pieces
did
they
I.
lost on defense. I was wrong. But I should have seen the Jets' demise coming, and I didn't. I was high on the Jets this year. I thought they fixed their offensive line. I thought Aaron coming back. I thought they would have a chance to win the AFC East. I even picked them to do so with my bold prediction this year. And yeah, by about week two, I was wrong. They're an absolute circus. Aaron Rodgers not a top quarterback anymore. They're an abject disaster.
Yeah.
Um, and I can't believe how bad they actually are because they should not be this bad. I mean, they fired Robert Saleh and the defense got worse.
Yeah. Yeah, they are one of the few teams that are even further into a train wreck than the Cleveland Browns. They are nowhere near being competent. They don't even have anything exciting. Their most exciting player in Brees Hall has been a complete dud this year.
Yeah.
He hasn't done squat. I picked him round one, pick four, I think, in
Yeah,
fantasy.
everybody had. I didn't. To be honest with you, I did not really understand him as a top five fantasy pick because I thought those receivers were going to get a lot more in the passing game. But I some drafts, I think in my league he went number two.
Yeah, I think I picked him four or five, so I was right there too. But
I I don't get it, and I don't know. Do you think he retires? Like I don't think anyone's going to want him.
I, if the Browns at this point, if they say this was Watson's last year, I think he would be a great guy to come in there and try and lead that locker room. But unfortunately, he wouldn't work here. I don't know what team would pick him up. You'd have to find a team that has a lot of pieces and wants to be able to measure the rest of their team and not have to worry about measuring the QB because we know Aaron Rodgers still has something.
Well, that was supposed to be the Jets. Am I wrong though?
You're
To
right.
me, he looks like he is a bottom 12-ish quarterback in the league. Like
Yeah,
I don't think I think this is the what I thought was the last year in Green Bay he struggled because they had no receivers.
right,
Those receivers took time to develop. I thought Aaron coming off the Achilles, I thought it would be a slow start, but I thought he'd ramp up as the season goes on. I thought we would see somewhat of a form back to his 2021 MVP self, and he looks like a shell of himself. But we did say the same thing about Russell Wilson a couple years ago.
right. How old
So
is Rodgers? Is he 40?
he's 41. He just turned uh 41 this past week.
And Russell, how old's he?
33-ish, I want to say.
Okay. I mean, there's the difference right there,
Yeah,
right? Russell, that he was in a bad system in Denver.
yeah.
Aaron's never really been into a bad system until now, but I'm afraid to say that 41 years old might not be the best time to be falling into a bad system in the NFL.
Last NFL question for you. Your thoughts on what, in my opinion, I'm not doubting them because they are 11 and 1, but there does something feel off about Kansas City, or is it they're just not trying in the regular season?
I believe they're 10 of their 11 wins were all within a score, correct?
I believe so. I know they did blow out New Orleans. They might have had a 9 point victory in there somewhere, but the one game they did blow out was the Saints, who were a disaster anyway. So,
It, they remind me a lot of the Steelers in the fact that they go out there and get the job done. They're a little flashier, right? You have Patrick Mahomes, you have a guy named Travis Kelsey, you have a guy named Xavier Worthy. You have a lot of good guys on that team, but the style of football right now and the way that they're winning games, they're not the Detroit Lions, right? The Detroit Lions are going out there and blowing teams out.
yeah,
They're blowing good teams out. The Kansas City Chiefs are just plain and simple winning. And it's a different game come playoff time. And I'm excited to see what happens, right? The Kansas City Chiefs
yeah,
very well could be a first round exit. They very well could make it to the Super Bowl.
yeah. Well, I think, unless they slip up here, they're probably going to get the first round bye, I would imagine. Um, I think my first time where I was like, oh, maybe we should actually be a little bit concerned was when, and again, Bryce Young's been playing good, but I thought after they lost to Buffalo, they would come back and they would put on a show against Carolina, and they could not stop the Panthers' offense.
No, that was a fun game, by the way.
Yeah,
Electric game. If I'm a Chiefs fan, I'm not concerned because you still have Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. It's like as a
hmm
New England fan, you never had concern when it was Belichick and Tom Brady out there playing for your team, where you expected to win the Super Bowl every single year. And that's how Chiefs fans should feel right now. It's not something they're used to though, because they're used to the Kansas City Chiefs coming out and beating the brakes off of everybody. So I can understand where there might be some concern.
like that clip from the Brands World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brands World podcast right here on YouTube.